A few years back, I lived in a fairly small neighborhood. I lived next door to a lovely little elderly couple, and one day she asked if I could help her clean the spare room of her house. I agreed to do it, and I was surprised by the amount of old technology hidden in it. Old toys, a child's computer, you name it, it was there. What truly caught my eye, though, was a box of VHS tapes labeled PBS. When I asked her about the tapes, she said that she used to record episodes of shows like Barney so that her grandson could watch them when he came over to visit in the mid to late 90s. I was curious, so I asked if I could buy the tapes off her so that I could watch them when I finished cleaning up the room. She agreed to this, and after I finished cleaning, I handed her a crisp $10 bill and carried the heavy box back to my house. After sitting it on my couch and examining the multiple tapes that sat untouched and dusty, they were organized by the order which they were recorded, going from 1 to 24. That night, I spent most of my time watching them out of boredom. It was around 3 a.m. when I decided to watch one last tape and then hit the hay. Since there were 24 episodes that I had already watched, and I had already watched 11 of them, I grabbed the one cleanly labeled Author Number 12, and wiped the dust off the spine in my hand and popped it into my VHS player. It started out with the usual sponsors, commercials that played on most other PBS shows. The sound coming from the tape was distorted from age, giving everything a robotic, slightly staticky tone. This was the only tape that had that issue so far, and I sighed, assuming that every tape from here on out would have the same issue. The episode began, and the intro was different than what I had remembered. The animation was choppier, and the music was less memorable than the classic Rasta that accompanied most episodes. I got a bit excited at that point, thinking that maybe I had discovered an early episode that could be sold online for a pretty penny. I turned the volume up a little, and the main episode started. It began with a shot of Arthur's little sister DW sitting at the kitchen table with a worried look on her little face. The animation was still choppy and low quality, but when DW began to speak, I was confused. Her voice was deeper and sounded like it had been recorded in someone's bathroom. Her mother walked in and began to speak to her in a harsh voice that sounded similar to the voice from the normal episodes, but not quite perfect. She was saying something about how much trouble she was in and that she was grounded. DW pleaded with her mother, begging her not to ground her, but she was sent upstairs to her room. There were a few frame interruptions at that point. I gently hit the player to get it back to normal, which worked. The tape played as normal again and directly went into the strange silent test of DW walk cycle. This lasted for maybe a minute before another frame skip occurred, when next it played DW, who was sitting in her room with her arms crossed. She looked a little solemn, and she proceeded to talk to herself. The girl conjured up a plan in order to still have fun despite being in trouble. A sly look on her face as she stood up and walked down the hall to her parents' room. Once again, a skip occurred, and she was now under her parents' bed for something. The sound grew scratchy, and I couldn't quite understand what she had said. The only thing that I could hear clear was play. After this, the episode took a huge turn. The same frames from the animation played for a couple of seconds before it showed her pulling something out from under the bed. The camera zoomed into her hands, which she was holding a strange blue gun of sorts. She smiled and lifted it, pointing it at a wall and making a pew-pew sound with it. She then ran around the room, continuing to make gun sounds. After that, DW sat down, tuckered out. The girl had a smile on her face as she brought the gun closer to her face to examine it with child curiosity. She then spun it around and pointed it to her face while closing one eye to look down at the barrel. A generic giggle sound clip from stock was played while one frame of her with the closed eyes staring on the screen. I assumed that the videotape was stuck again. As I leaned over to tap the player, my ears were met with a piercingly loud tone, similar to the tone played when a broadcaster is testing their emergency system. A black overlay was placed over the episode, and it had a bit of a text on it. From what I remember, it said the following: "The Public Broadcasting Service of County 4. We apologize for the inconvenience. Your regular scheduled program will return in a minute. Thank you for your patience. In case of accidental airing, immediately stop and remove from lineup by January 1st, 1996. A very loud, pitchy bang sound was then played, and the tape whirred to a stop. I sat dumbfounded by what I had just seen. I didn't know whether or not to be scared or confused, but either way, I didn't know what to do. I decided to take the tape out of the machine, and it was hot when it was removed, and I wound up dropping it in order not to burn my hand. When it cooled off, I checked the tape inside the casing to see if there was some sort of explanation for the odd skipping throughout the video. The magnetic tape that had been damaged by the heat and stuck to the lid of the casing. I was feeling a bit hopeful, so I decided to stick the tape back into the player, hoping it would play one more time so that I could capture a picture of the episode, or at least a black overlay. I managed to take one photo on a poor quality disposable camera I had lying around. After I took the photo, the tape completely broke and wouldn't play again. I threw it away, and that night I tossed and turned, wondering about the story behind the episode that I had watched. The next day, I spent most of the day Googling every little detail I remembered about it, and there was only one website that had any information about it. It was a virus-laden old forum that was closing down within the week. One of the discussion was about an episode I had seen. The creator of the thread had stated that they saw this very broadcast as a child, and it had stuck with them for years on end. According to multiple users on the thread, the best explanation for what I had seen was that the possible animation test made at least a year before the final show began to air. The intro and voices were placeholders, and the plot might have been about gun safety. PBS didn't like the graphic nature of this plot, and so they only used it as a test animation that accidentally aired on a Friday morning in January of 1996. It should have been destroyed by the 1st of January, but that didn't happen, either by accident or by purpose.